onto his car. He pulled out a giant suitcase, opened it, threw all his clothes onto the dusty ground, and unpacked his invention MandelBOT. He explained to us MandelBOT is not a 3D printer, but rather S.U.R.F.A, Scalable Universal Robotic Frame Assembly. It can be a 3D printer, but it can also be equipped with laser cutter, CNC, or anything else you fancy. Scott is using his MandelBOT to print almond butter onto cookies. We talk with Scott about his company for organizing events, how his education helped him build the company, his very unusual performance, and more. Enjoy! Miscellaneous beings, I am Mickey Vanousek, and you are listening to my voice. Welcome. Today I have Scott Beibin here with me. It's great to have you.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you so much.
Let's start with your background. What did you study? Did you go to college?
I did go to college, but so my early interests in engineering stem from aerospace, or a big interest in aerospace engineering. When I was in high school, I wanted to not only be an aerospace engineer, I wanted to be an astronaut. And that's when I became very interested in electronics and all other kinds of things. And so that interest has continued throughout my entire life. But what has been interesting is that I've done many different other things that aren't related to science or engineering in the time in between. And I think that that's given what I'm doing a kind of like particular type of flavor or aesthetic. Yeah.
Cool. So you got inspired by the moon landing? Is that safe to assume?
I was inspired by the moon landing. I was inspired by the space shuttle program and Skylab, and just a general interest in astronomy. But not just it wasn't just an interest in space. It's an interest in how nature works, how everything works, how all those things overlap. So, not just the physics, but also interest in chemistry and biology and earth sciences and all other types of things like that.
So what was your major in college?
Anthropology.
Anthropology, interesting. Why did you decide to study anthropology if you wanted to be an astronaut and had a great interest in engineering?
Well, when I was in high school, I had this realization, because this was in the 80s that I was in high school, and one of the realizations was that the main way that somebody could get into that industry or in that world was through the military, and I just really wasn't interested in having my my energy put into things that could potentially kill people. And so I had this awakening when I was like toward the end of age 16, where I started becoming interested in social sciences as opposed to just hard sciences. And so that's really what led me to anthropology. But I wasn't just studying anthropology. I was also studying linguistics and archaeology, like a kind of overlap of a few different things. But it's interesting. I still use a lot of the things that I learned then in all the things that I do today.
How so? How do you use them?
So I'm one of the co-founders of a thing called Evil Twin Booking Agency, and we organize speaking events and do strategy for a lot of kind of like, I guess, people doing things that are a bit challenging to the culture. Like, so we work with people like Glenn Greenwald and Vandana Shiva, Alex Gray, the Yes Men, Pussy Riot, like all these types of people that are doing things that are kind of, I guess, pushing cultural boundaries. And so a lot of what I'm using my I guess, my anthropological background, and it's kind of like understanding the dynamics of how groups function, and how these speakers relate to the different types of activist communities and creative communities that they interact with. And so so I'm constantly thinking about a lot of the different theories that come from I guess they come from the field of anthropological studies. I'm just interested in history. I'm interested in the way that information is transmitted, and how it manifests itself culturally, and that's kind of how a lot of that works its way into my business and also into my art.
Okay, could you give like a specific example on how your knowledge of soft sciences helped you during your business practice? And
So the project itself, so Evil Twin, originates from being a kind of like a culture jamming arts and activism project, where the challenge was to take voices that were coming from underground political situations and bring them into mainstream context. And so a lot of that was understanding the different types of dynamics of the cultures that exist in media and academia. And these are very different types of cultures. Like, different people use different types of language. Even if they're speaking the same language, they're using different types of terminologies in different contexts. And in order to insert a lot of these ideas that the people we were working with into these types of contexts, it's important to pay very close attention to how, how the dynamics work in the cultures, because it's not just about like an industry. Like, there are people involved, and when you have people involved in different things, there are different types of ways that people build trust with one another. Sometimes through language, sometimes through body movement. So a lot of the studies that I had, involving like psychology and anthropology, were like, these were things that I was applying into providing a voice for a lot of the people we're working with, to basically elevate them into more prominent public visibility.
Cool. So after college, what did you do just after graduating college?
Well, I actually quit school after I was in for 4.5 years, and one of the main reasons why I quit is that I had started a DIY punk record label. So it was one of the very early record labels that was doing this kind of like a very, very geeky, what's the best word? It was a very kind of nerdy, geeky scene that came out of the hardcore scene, where like hardcore was like the hardcore community at the time was very aggressive, and I was very interested in having a kind of alternative to that. And so I'd started a record label that was called Bloodlink. And so I put out some very early stuff like bands like Struggle, Undertow, Unbroken, Groundwork, Policy of Three, and later bands like An Albatross, Mile Marker, Adam and His Package, and things like that. So I'd quit school and focused on doing the label full time. And I was also doing like pirate radio stuff and building large puppets for political demonstrations, like very, very big, street theater oriented things. And I thought about going back to school, but then I started this thing called the Lost Film Festival, and that wound up going on for a very long time. And so I guess I've continued my education just, out of curiosity, but I've never gone back to academia directly. So like with the booking agency, with Evil Twin Booking, I'm able to keep my foot in academia and what people are talking about, because we mostly organize things with students at universities, either student activists or we work with professors.
Cool. So, how did you get into engineering?
So, when I was a little kid, I started to take apart a lot of these transistor radios that my parents had. Actually, my grandpa used to sell like old electronics toys, like electronics and different toys and things like that from the 60s. And so there was always stuff laying around. So I would take it apart using, whatever tools I had in the house. Then eventually I learned how to solder, and I did this contemporary electronics kit. And there was a store called Radio Shack in my town. I used to go bike down to Radio Shack when I was in elementary school, and then I'd always, pick up resistors and capacitors and breadboards and different types of things like that. And so that was very, very early. And I was also very inspired by a lot of inventors like Thomas Edison, and also I knew about Nikola Tesla very early on. And so these were my inspirations.
Cool. What were some of your early engineering projects you worked on?
So when I was in space camp, space camp was this kind of like thing that's at the Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville, Alabama. And a project that I worked on was it was diffraction of laser light through atmospheres. So basically, we're taking lasers and putting it through different types of liquids to see how the different effects. My role was in putting together the configuration of the experiment. So I was a teenager at that point. So I guess that's more of a kind of physics thing. But in terms of positioning the laser and the mirrors and lenses and different types of things like that, that was the task that I was given. Like while other people were doing, were piloting the ship, I was conducting experiments, and so that was like an early thing.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
You also mentioned you're a performer.
Yes.
How did that part of your existence come into being?
Let's see. So I've always liked performing. So I'm a musician, visual artist. Like I think that I just like to create and put my stuff out into the world. So I guess how did I become a performer? That's such a great question. I feel like I've always kind of had that in me, because I like to do things in a very kind of performative and theatrical way. I think it's a really good way of teaching. And so a lot of the stuff I do is very oriented around, education. And I think in order to make things easy to learn, it's sometimes very, very important to make things fun and interesting. And so, so that was one of the impetuses behind becoming a performer. Currently, my performance art stuff that I do is a science, it's like a kind of eco-science stage show called Groucho Fractal, where I travel around and I do this show powered by bicycle, where audience members use...
What do you mean it's powered by bicycle?
So
Like there's someone else besides you who's riding a bicycle, and
yeah.
does it power the speakers as well, or?
Yes. Yeah. So audience members will sit on a bicycle that's connected to this power generation unit.
How many
I designed.
bicycles?
I can power everything off of one.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So audience members will sit on the bicycle and pedal, and
Is it very loud?
it can get kind of loud sometimes. Like, well, the older systems were pretty loud, where you're kind of pushing the dynamo. But I've managed to tweak it so that it's not very loud at this point.
Cool. I meant if the speakers get very loud.
Oh yeah. Well, so I'm using at this current point, I'm using computer speakers, which are kind of amazing actually. Like that. Like if you have these external computer speakers, they're very lightweight and they can really generate a lot of, like, they can get really, really loud. They don't take up a ton of power. So, I mean, it's not the type of thing where you have giant amplifier cabinets and stuff. It's like within reason. You have a, if you're pedaling and you're generating X amount of electricity and you have a battery connected to it, you only have so much power to use. I want to clarify the show. It's not directly bike powered, although it could be. So if you had somebody pedaling and you had supercapacitors that were receiving power from a dynamo, then you could technically do that. But I'm actually using batteries and supercapacitors in combination. So if somebody were to stop pedaling and get off and allow somebody else to pedal, they would be able to charge the batteries and charge everything in order to keep it running.
Yeah, and your show wouldn't have to stop.
Yeah, it wouldn't have to stop. Early on, I was doing it directly, but it just created too much interference, and I would try to play it off and do improv in order to kind of make people laugh while things were messing up. But one of the things that it would do is it would cause everything to reset, and it was a problem when everything would just reset. So
I kind of interrupted your flow with the questions about the bicycle and the power. You were explaining how your performance looks like.
Oh, okay. So it is a show powered by bicycle. Audience members pedal bikes, and they also use brain-computer interface, so EEG or electroencephalograph.
What kind of brain-machine interface?
So originally I was using the emotive epoch and the NeuroSky, like some different NeuroSky devices, even a hacked Jedi Force trainer, which is also a NeuroSky device. So what I would do is I would take these devices and take the information that's coming out of them and then process it in my own way using software. So originally everything was just done in code using Python, but later on I would start to use things like pure data in order to take the information that was coming out and process it and then have it do things. So for example, you'd use the data from the brain-computer interface device to modify a three-dimensional mesh in a program called Blender. So it would modify the mesh in Blender, and then you would export that as two hemispheres and print that onto cookies using almond paste.
While playing music?
Well, there's not really music, or there wasn't music in the older Groucho Fractal shows, but the new show that I'm working on, the new touring version, will have music.
Oh, cool. So you're just recording people's brains, and based on that,
Real-time data. Yeah, so it's like real-time data is being taken, and it's modifying a mesh, and then we're printing the mesh.
Interesting. Cool. What an interesting project.
Thank you. Yeah, it's called Groucho Fractal's Nearly Amazing Quantum Transdimensional Survival Guide at the End and Beginning of Everything.
That's a long name.
Groucho Fractal for short.
If there are other young people who are interested in both soft sciences and maybe engineering or computer science, would you recommend going your route of studying soft sciences, or what would your recommendation be?
My recommendation is to always remain open-minded and to think of science as a technique. Like, science isn't like this monolith where it's like it's an arbiter of truth. Science is a technique to get at the truth. Sometimes it's easier to get at the truth if you're looking at physical things that are tangible and quantifiable. We can look at things that are kind of low-hanging fruit, essentially, in the universe, because there are consistent ways that atoms and and particles that they behave, and we can look at materials. These things are kind of the low-hanging fruit because they're easier to understand and to count. So quantification is an important aspect in science, but it's not the only one. And sometimes it's very hard to quantify things that are social. Like, how do you measure things like oppression? How do you measure love? Are these things you can measure?
Yeah, but psychologists are trying to come up with ways to quantify those and measure them, right?
They are, but the question is that a thing that is quantifiable in the same way that you would quantify something in the physical world?
Right.
Like, are there other ways that we should be thinking about measurement? And so that question itself is it's like, how do you conduct these experiments? How do you gather data? What's the quality of data that you're gathering? How are you processing it? How are you communicating it? And also, how do you keep an open mind about future advances that we have to bring about a deeper understanding, or a sideways understanding of the same thing. So I guess my recommendation to people who are involved in hard sciences and math, as well as the soft sciences, is to try to respect all forms of expression and of data collection, and to understand that one might learn something new through keeping an open mind about these things. One of the things I really like to do, so I'll go to kind of these music festivals. Like, a lot of the time they're kind of like, I guess, new agey, and there's a lot of pseudoscience there. But out of the 90% pseudoscience, there's sometimes 10%. I'm just throwing these numbers out, but there's this small percentage of stuff that's actually true, and stuff that's kind of on the frontiers of knowledge, and that's and so I try to hang out in these types of worlds in order to open my mind to new things that I might not have been aware of before. So
could you give an example a thing you learned like this?
Yeah. So I'm particularly interested in fermentation.
Like of foods?
Of foods. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah. So when I go to these types of events, I'll sometimes see new experiments that people are doing where they're making things like kefir or kombucha in different types of configurations, and they're experimenting with different types of tea and different types of cultures. They may not be doing it in a scientific manner, but they're experimenting, and I look at their experiments and I kind of will see. So, in a simple way, I like drinking delicious kombucha, and if there are new ways of doing it, I like learning from that. That's an example.
Let's talk some more about your business.
Okay.
You mentioned you founded it with a co-founder.
Yes.
I have a great respect for people who founded businesses, successful businesses. Could you talk a bit more about how that happened, what motivated you, and what was it like in the beginning?
So, yeah, thank you. That's a good question. So Elizabeth Jane Cole and I met at one of my Lost Film Fest shows, and at the time she had just graduated from university and was looking for something new to do. And so I'd been doing booking of bands and booking my own kind of public performance stuff for a long time, and I needed help at that time. So I decided to teach Liz everything that I knew about it and more. And so we initially started off as it wasn't just a business. It was a way of booking the Lost Film Fest, but it was also a way to bring attention and create more public prominence for people doing things in underground communities. And so in order to do that, you have to be organized in a certain way. Like, you can't just snap your fingers and do it. You need to keep lists of the people who are doing booking. You need to keep lists of the people who are interested in the things. You need to create relationships between these people. You need to decide on pricing and flexibility in pricing. You need to do accounting. So there are like lots of different things that go into running a business like that. And a lot of it has to do with trust building and, like this type of thing. So I guess what I would encourage people to do if they were thinking about starting their own business is to keep an open mind and try to learn as many skills as possible, and also to never have the mindset of where you're above a simple task like sweeping up. Like I think that a really good and humbling but nice way to even start a business, like when people will start like selling lemonade as a kid, like that's a really good thing, because it pushes people into interacting with people, especially if they're shy. It kind of forces that type of thing where they kind of open up and pushes their boundaries. So doing those types of things that kind of push your own boundaries is a really important aspect. And constantly doing research and learning. Like that's the fun of it. Like if you really are passionate about doing a thing and you want to stay involved in it, sometimes it's a good idea to create a business around it. The key, though, is to make sure there's a balance where you're not burning yourself out, because also starting a business around things that you love can also lead to you hating the things that you once loved, because it becomes very, stressful. So, for example, a lot of musicians that I've been, I've been around for years, like they love music and that's why they start a band. But then once it gets into the business aspect of things, that's when it stops being as much fun. So the key is to always find an angle in which things are still really fun and to make sure that things are really interesting. And the key to that is to do things that are not always oriented around commerce.
Mm-hmm. So, the key to still having fun is not to always try to earn money?
That's right. Do things from your heart, like at the core of what it is that you desire doing. If you're always counting how much money there is, it takes away from a lot of the fun. And so what I do is I think about pricing, because like everything with the booking agency is very fluid. So we have a different type of pricing structure for institutions like museums or or businesses than when we're dealing with arts or activist groups, who generally aren't as well funded, or community related things. Like I do a ton of stuff for free for people, but then I also do, I also am an advisor to a few different companies and I'm a paid advisor. But for a nonprofit group, I'll generally just come in and do it for snacks or just come in and do it for the joy of it. Just always be in the practice. That's the key. Always be in the practice and have fun. And don't think that if you're actually giving away your knowledge, if you're sharing it, that you're somehow cheapening the value of your knowledge. Like if anything, it's really all about creating the network. Like if you are the network, you don't really have to worry about the scarcity of it.
Cool. Well, I'm afraid we ran out of time.
Okay.
But it was great to have you on. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. Let's go on the boat.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much for listening to my voice. If you have any thoughts you want to share with me and other listeners, go to my subreddit and post a comment to the associated post. See you there.